I'm not actually saying this was Bigfoot. I just don't know what else to call it. You be the judge. It was a couple of years ago. I was 18, maybe 19. It was November of 2012. It was pretty cold outside. Some friends of mine called me to see if I wanted to go hang out. Not really to do anything in particular, just chill. It sounded fun, and I was bored, so I went along. It was me and 3 of my friends. We went down the highway for a little while, not knowing where we would end up until one of my friends mentioned a dirt road he knew of not too far from where we were. We eventually found it and started driving down it. Not too much later, maybe 5 minutes, we came across a house. None of us knew if it was abandoned, even though it looked like it, or if it was occupied. My friend that knew about the road we had just came down said last thing he heard no one lived there. So we figured getting out of the car, having a cigarette, and just enjoying the cold air wouldn't be a problem. We were leaning up against an abandoned looking car that was sitting in what would have been the driveway, I suppose. Just hanging around, talking and smoking. It was quiet and dark. That kind of quiet that's just a tad bit uncomfortable. I was about halfway done smoking when my friend quiets everyone down. None of us made a sound, thinking perhaps someone did live in the house and he saw them. I was ready to bail, but no people at all. He points to the left side of the house, and there, in the dark, we all saw whatever this thing was. It was darker than the sky behind it, and it was tall. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, and you could see hair all over its body. Everyone stood there, shocked, I suppose, at what was standing before us, a mere 15 feet from us. I knew everyone was thinking the same thing. Get out of there, right now. Before anyone could say anything, it sprinted. Not just came at us, but it went from dead still to a full sprint in a second. We somehow managed to get into the car without it getting to us. We took off before all the doors were even closed. Everybody but our friend driving looked back as we sped off. I remember seeing it, still sprinting at the car full speed, almost catching up to us. It was running right towards the abandoned car we had been leaning on previously. Instead of running around it, it jumped straight over the thing as if it wasn't even there. I was petrified. We didn't stop driving until we got to my friend's apartment, miles and miles away from where we saw that thing. To this day, I still don't know what it was, and haven't seen anything else of it since then, but I remember it, standing there menacingly like it did back then. Bigfoot may be far-fetched, but I don't know what else it could have been.
In the early mid-2000s, I was living in Southeast Texas and dating a real gem of a guy. One of his favorite things to do was take me out on the weekend to a local bar, which would have been awesome had I not been the designated driver every single time. I always limited myself to 1 beer because I knew that he would inevitably end up shit-faced and I'd be the one driving us back to his apartment. I say this because it's important to note that when this particular event occurred, I was not drunk. I was not even a little bit buzzed. I had drank 1 beer, and even that had been hours before. After leaving the bar, I drove my boyfriend and myself back to his apartment, where I made sure he got inside and into bed okay, before I headed home in my own car. I was still living with my parents, a good 25 miles away, so I had a decent drive ahead of me. I remember we had stayed at the bar that night until it closed at 2 in the morning, so it was close to 3 by the time I got on the road. Getting from his apartment to my house involved 2 possible routes. I could hit the loop and connect to the highway, which took me straight home, or I could take a back road through the woods, avoid the loop, and end up on that same highway. For some reason that night, I chose the back road. Both routes took about the same amount of time, unless it was rush hour. I just preferred the back road that night. No reason why. About midway down this back road, there was a very sharp curve. I have a tendency to drive fast, and even I would always slow down to about 15 to 20 miles per hour to take this curve safely. Again, it was late at night, so I could only see what the illumination of my headlights allowed. Just as I was slowly coming out of the curve, something came walking out of the woods in front of me. It came from the left side of the road, headed towards the tree line on the right side. I hit my brakes, silently thanking the powers that be that I hadn't been driving any faster, because by the time my car came to a complete stop, this thing was maybe a foot in front of me. I've told this story many times, and I'm not sure if anyone has really believed me. Normally when an animal runs across the highway, it's hauling ass, especially if it sees a car coming towards it. But this thing, it just stopped. Whatever it was on all fours, cross out Bigfoot, and it was staring straight at me in the dark. It was dark, its fur was all black, and it was taller than any dog I've ever seen. A friend of mine used to raise Great Danes, and this thing was even taller than them. After about 20 seconds, I realized that maybe sitting still in a sharp curve in the middle of the road wasn't the smartest place to be. So I quickly decided to snap a picture with my phone and try driving around this thing. I looked away to grab my cell phone, a Motorola Razr at the time, and when I looked up again, the road was clear. Whatever it was gone. I scanned the dark tree line on both sides of the road, to no avail. I remember thinking the creature's fur looked almost like bear fur, thick and short. But this was most certainly not a bear. I'm sharing this in the hope that maybe someone else who has spent time in East Texas might have a similar sighting. I drove that road many times after that night, and I've never seen anything else like it. I do know that a large chunk of property runs parallel to the road, and it's all owned by one man. From what I've heard, he strictly enforces the whole no trespassing thing, and isn't much for visitors, to the point that I've heard more than one story about census workers being run off his land, but maybe that's a coincidence.
This happened about 10 years ago, in Pennsylvania. My friends and I found a clearing in the woods where we were always hanging out. It was very secluded. It was between some railroad tracks and a local park with a creek running through it. There were no streetlights visible from there, and no houses in sight. It was a perfect location for doing the kind of things teenagers like to do. Anyways, one night, myself and my friend Adam were down there by ourselves. The sun was setting and it was starting to get dark when we heard some rustling in the bushes nearby. Probably a deer or something, my friend suggested. We had seen deer and other wildlife in that area before, so we were not alarmed and continued with whatever we were doing. By now, it was dark, and we heard the rustling again. This time it was slightly closer. Then all of a sudden, next to me was a loud thud. Someone had thrown a rock at me and missed. The spot we were in was secluded, but it was known to local teenagers as a spot to hang out and drink. So we assumed that it was some of our friends or acquaintances playing a joke on us. Another rock landed in our vicinity. "Hey, who was that?" I called out. No answer, just more rustling out in the distance. Adam and I started picking up the rocks and throwing them back, calling out insults as we did this. We were certain that it was some of the guys we knew, probably coming down with a case of beer or something, and they were just messing with us. But in the back of my mind, I was starting to feel creeped out. The wind was carrying an awful smell, like rotten eggs and dirty diapers. The smell was so intense that it actually burned my nostrils. That's when the rustling got even closer. It was the sound of footsteps on the fallen leaves and twigs snapping. Whatever was out there was now right next to me. The noise was so close that I should have been able to see what made it, even in the dark, but there was nothing there. But as soon as I had heard the noise, it could be heard next to my friend. Although we saw nothing, we knew we weren't alone. Adam and I looked at each other and without speaking, took off running as fast as we could. We ran a half a mile back to our house on pure adrenaline. We locked the doors and shut the windows and started watching TV in the living room. We didn't talk about what happened. We just sat there. It was eerily quiet outside. When we first arrived back at the house, we could hear crickets chirping outside. But now it was silent out there, except the sounds of the wind. Adam got up to go to the kitchen, and when he took his first step, we heard a noise that I can only describe as the sound of a baby crying, but really loud and inhuman. It made my blood run cold. The noise stopped almost as soon as it started. He took another step, and we heard the noise again. We looked at each other, but neither one of us knew what to say. It was totally bizarre. Every time he took a step, we could hear the crying sound. We heard a huge crash out in the backyard. It was followed by intense pounding on the back door. We started to move back to the kitchen to see what was out there, but then we heard the same pounding on the front door. It happened so fast that it was almost simultaneous. There was no way that a person could have run around the house and hit both doors in the amount of time that took place between each occurrence. It alternated a few times between banging on the front and the back doors of the house. We were starting to get really freaked out. Out in the backyard, we heard more banging and then a loud, unearthly roar, like a lion or a bear, but much louder. The sound echoed in the night. Adam went to the closet and grabbed one of his dad's rifles. We went back into the kitchen and looked out the window to see what was there, but we saw nothing. The motion detector light was on and the trash cans had been thrown around. The picnic table and barbecue were overturned, and things were in a general disarray. Then we heard the roar again, out front this time, and it was pounding on the door harder than ever. It even broke the little glass window at the top of the door. Then nothing. It was gone. I slept there that night because I didn't want to walk home. Our group of friends continued to hang out in that clearing in the woods throughout our high school. We had a few more experiences with the creature, but this one was the most intense. We nicknamed it the Beast. Years later, on Coast to Coast AM, I heard that Bigfoot makes a noise like a baby crying, and that it will throw things at people to scare them out of its territory. It reminded me of what we encountered that night. Since I never saw it, I can't be sure of what it was, but it was definitely scary.
I've been a huge believer in all things paranormal for a while now. I've always loved and believed in ghost stories, poltergeist phenomena, and other things like that. Usually the only thing that I'm skeptical about is cryptozoology. I don't believe in many of the weird creatures that people report seeing. All that changed during a class trip in my junior year of high school. We went up to the mountains for fresh air, scenery, and spending time, bonding with our classmates. One of the required activities was a night hike. During the hike, my friend Chelsea and I spotted a path separate from the one that everyone else was taking. Together with our friend Sarah, we hung back until the group got ahead of us, then moved down the alternate trail. The trip itself was fairly normal. We only had one flashlight and made all the usual stupid Blair Witch jokes and making sounds to creep each other out. After about an hour and a half, we started getting seriously freaked out. We were way deeper into the forest than we thought we were, and we were getting lost. We turned back because we started hearing the cliché rustling bushes. As soon as we headed back, we got the fright of our lives. Something huge ran across the path. Chelsea, panicking, shone her flashlight on it, and it seemed to freeze in the bright light. All I can remember is that it looked like what I'd expect Bigfoot to look like, except its fur had some white splotches and it had large claws. Its eyes were shining red, like most animals caught in the lights. It made a noise somewhere between a scream and a howl. The sight of that creature and the sound it made will stay with me for the rest of my life. I have never been more scared in my life. Just thinking of what it looked like and what it sounded like is giving me chills right now. We ran back the way we came and reached the camp at least an hour before everyone else, staying in the main lobby of the camp we were staying at. We asked a few of our classmates if they heard any weird howls. They said they heard the howls, but the tour guide told them it was just a mountain lion. We left the next morning without asking any of the camp employees whether they had a run-in with the Bigfoot thing. It's been a year now, and the three of us still refuse to talk about it. I'm not a cryptozoology skeptic anymore, that's for sure.
This story isn't one that I like to relive. I'm not a superstitious person, and nothing weird has ever really happened to me, other than this one experience. This takes place in the fall of 1997. 15-year-old me had recently moved from Utah to live with my dad and new stepmom in Idaho. After they got married, my dad sold his house in the city and moved in with her. She owned a house in a rural farming community in southeast Idaho. This was a big change for me, but I liked it. With roots in Idaho, I had lots of family in the area. I had spent a lot of summers here growing up, and my cousins, who I was very close with and lived only 20 miles away. It was very early October. The weather was getting colder, and the leaves were starting to change. One Friday afternoon after school, I was sitting at the computer surfing the net, like many kids did in the 90s, when I got a phone call. It was my cousin Sheldon. He was wanting to get one last camping trip in before the weather got too cold, so he was calling around to see if people wanted to go. I was definitely interested. Sheldon was a really cool and hilarious guy. Camping with him was really fun. I asked him where he planned on going. Kelly Canyon, he replied. I hesitated. I had grown up hearing stories about that place. Everything from Bigfoot sightings, bear attacks, and cases of missing hikers and campers. Kelly Canyon mountain range was massive. Miles upon miles of dirt roads and trails. You could easily get lost if you don't know your way around. My cousins were all hardcore hunters/fishers and had grown up in the area, so they knew their shit, and they owned a lot of guns. He could sense my hesitation, but he reassured me that most of the stories were bullshit. We'd have fun, and it was only for one night. We'd be back Saturday afternoon, so I agreed. An hour later, we were headed up to the mountain range. It was me, Sheldon, his friend Dan, and Dan's girlfriend Julie. We headed up the narrow, winding road. There wasn't any traffic, as the wind had blown in that day and dropped temperatures significantly, making it a cold night for camping. We passed Kelly Canyon Ski Resort, signaling the end of civilization. The pavement ended, and it was all dirt roads from here on out. We drove into the wilderness, seeing only a handful of campers, most of whom were near the entrance not far from the ski resort. We decided to be brave and go deeper into the mountains, into total isolation. We found a spot about 5 miles in, tucked in the back of a bunch of campgrounds in a dead end against a fairly steep wooded hill. Camping against the hills would help shelter us from the wind. We set up the tents and built a fire. The sun was going down, and the wind lightly blew through the area. We just hung out in front of the fire, poking it with sticks and holding meaningless conversations. Now, I can't really explain it, but there was kind of a weird vibe in the air. Like something just wasn't right. I knew we all felt it, but nobody said anything about it. The only things said were comments about how empty the canyon was, how eerily quiet things were, except for the light wind rustling through the trees, etc. We all stayed close together. Nobody really felt like wandering off to explore the area or anything. We even put our tents right next to each other. Sheldon and I were sharing one, and Dan and Julie had their own. I figured they would have wanted some privacy and pitched their tents a ways off, but nope, we were right next to each other. I had been camping lots of times, and Sheldon practically lived outdoors, but this time just seemed different. Usually by now it was getting dark and spooky. Sheldon would start spouting off scary campfire stories about Bigfoot and skinwalkers from the nearby Shoshone Indian reservations, but he didn't. He was actually kind of quiet. So we all just sat around the fire enjoying its warmth. A couple hours had passed. The sun was gone, and we had actually started to loosen up a little. I didn't feel as uneasy as I did when we first got here. We were telling funny stories and laughing our asses off. The wind had died down and it was dead quiet. I was talking to Dan about something when Sheldon suddenly stood up and looked into the woods. He didn't say anything, just stood quietly there, staring. We asked him what was up. He said he thought he heard something, so of course we all froze. Everyone was dead silent at this point, looking off into the woods. About a minute had gone by, and we all heard. It was far away, but distinct enough to hear it. It sounded like someone had picked up a hefty fallen branch and swung it into a tree. The joyful, funny attitude had faded. It was replaced by an uneasy feeling that we weren't alone. If it was summertime, we would have chalked it up to other campers making noise, as this place was busy and full during the summer. But this was October. It was cold, and we were alone. There was nobody else around for miles. Sheldon broke the silence by saying it could just be an elk or a deer trotting through the trees and hitting a branch. It kind of put us at ease a little, and we sat back down around the fire. About 30 minutes later, we heard it again. Only closer. It was the same damn sound, like it was made with the same hefty branch. It seemed like it was coming from up the hill directly behind us, maybe 50 yards away. We didn't know what to think at this point. We all wanted to believe it was an animal of some sort, but deep down, that uneasy feeling just wouldn't let us write it off as such. Shortly after the cracking sounds, we heard what sounded like someone or something trudging through a brush. At this point, we're all visibly nervous and not afraid to hide it. Dan's girlfriend was the most scared, asking us to leave.
Let's go, guys. Let's leave. We shouldn't be here.
I asked Sheldon what he thought it was. He said it had to be an animal of some sort. He liked telling creepy stories, but he himself really didn't buy into that stuff. He went to his truck and pulled out his rifle, a Remington 9mm Magnum. He was an avid hunter and wasn't afraid of the woods, but I could tell he was a little uneasy about the situation. If it was a bear, we would hear huffing and puffing as it trenched through the forest, and a bear couldn't explain the wooden cracking sound. It sounded blatantly like someone swinging wood against a tree. With his rifle and a flashlight in hand, Sheldon started walking up the hill towards the sound. I want to see what kind of animal is up there. Want to come? I shrugged my shoulders. Nah, I'll stay here, I replied. I wasn't too keen on running at the time, and if it was a bear, the slowest one, me, would get eaten first. Dan was a hunter too, so he grabbed his shotgun and headed up with Sheldon to investigate. Julie and I stayed by the fire. She did not look happy. I could tell she just wanted to leave. I just told her if anything attacked us, Sheldon would blast a hole right through its head with his rifle. They weren't gone too long, maybe 20 minutes. They came back to the camp reporting that they couldn't find anything. We all just shrugged it off. It was cold, late, and we were all tired. Nobody really felt like packing up all the shit we brought and leaving, so we decided to go to bed. It took me a while to fall asleep, but I woke up several times throughout the night. One of the times I woke up, I could see that the fire was out completely, so it was dark. The wind had also picked up considerably, and it was so damn cold. I turned over to see if Sheldon was asleep, and to my surprise, he was awake and sitting upright, holding his rifle. He could hear me rustling in my sleeping bag, so he turned to my direction and put his index finger over his mouth. Shh. I sat up quietly and whispered, "What's going on?" He just held his finger, motioning to me to hold on a second. Then I heard the sound. Faint footsteps. Not far from our campground, near the road. They would move, speed up, and then stop. That sound kept repeating several times. The weird part was, it sounded like 2 feet, not 4. Like a person was out there running around. But I knew it wasn't possible. I tell you, I was terrified. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to leave the tent. I didn't want to go outside with whatever was making that noise. Sheldon was nervous too. "We should have picked a different spot," he whispered. "Oh great," I thought to myself. Why the hell would you say that? He had his watch on. It was already around 4:30 a.m. The sun would start to light up the morning sky in about an hour. He and I just sat there, terrified. Neither one of us wanting to move a single muscle. We heard the noises for maybe another 10 minutes before they took off into the woods across from our camp. They never returned. We were both wired. No sleep to be had now. We just waited there in our tent, in the dark, scared shitless. That hour seemed to last forever, but finally we could see through our tent that the sky was getting lighter. The sun was on its way. Sheldon carefully and quietly opened the zipper window of the tent just an inch. He peered outside. There was nothing out there. We waited a little longer for the sun to come up more. Then we both peeked outside the tent. It was clear. We got out, and as soon as we were rushing to Dan's tent, his door started to unzip open. He and Julie looked like they hadn't slept a wink. The look of fear was on both of their faces, and from their reactions to us, the same look was on Sheldon's and mine. They had been awake too. They heard the noises and were too afraid to get out of the tent. We all related pretty much the same story, except Dan said sometime around 2 a.m. he was awake and he heard what sounded like a voice from up in the hills. He couldn't make out what it said, but it sounded like someone aggressively saying a word in a foreign language a couple times. It sent chills through his body, and he started praying immediately. Sheldon and I were most likely asleep when this happened, so we didn't recall hearing it. We looked around our camp. Everything looked the same. The wind had blown a few things around, but that was it. We packed up our camp as fast as possible, throwing shit sloppily together just so we could get the hell out of there. While I was packing up the rest of our firewood we brought, Sheldon had gone over to the road where the noises came from. I wasn't really paying much attention to him, but I noticed that he was just standing there, staring down. Then he looked up at me with a white, pale face. I'll never forget that look as long as I live. I wanted to go over, but at the same time I didn't. He motioned for me to come over, so I did. What I saw scared the ever-living shit out of me. The image will be burned in my mind forever. Strange footprints everywhere. Nothing like I had ever seen before. They were eerily human. Not only longer and skinnier, and the toes were very slender, almost pointy, rather than the round shape like a person's. Dan came over too, and we all just sat there looking at them. Nobody knew what to say. We all just looked at each other with fear in our eyes. This was before camera phones, so nobody had a camera to take pictures of them. That was enough for us to nope the fuck out of there. We gathered the rest of our stuff, got in the truck, and jammed out of there. Sheldon drove so much faster than when we arrived. Nobody talked. Nobody hardly even moved the whole ride. We were all just in a daze from the lack of sleep, fear, and the reality of what we just saw. We passed Kelly Canyon Ski Resort. We were back into the paved roads, back into civilization. I couldn't take it anymore. I broke the silence, asking Sheldon what the hell those prints were. I don't know, and I don't want to know. Maybe some of those stories we heard growing up weren't complete bullshit after all. Julie was crying at this point. She just wanted to be home. None of us really knew what to say. We were all too afraid to admit that it could have been something superstitious. Dan mentioned about how his neighbor would tell him all about the stories he himself had heard growing up about Kelly Canyon, how the Shoshone Indians wouldn't go near it. They said it was cursed. I honestly don't know what to think, but I haven't been back since. Sheldon has numerous times, but he always stays near the opening of the canyon. He never ventures as far back as we did that time. I've skied at the resort, but that's as far as I will ever go into that canyon. We never really talk about it either. It's just one of those things we don't want to relive. All I know is I never want to see those footprints ever again.
I've never told anyone the complete details of this story. The version my family and friends know is nothing but a funny, youthful misadventure. That, however, is not true. Back when I was a kid on family road trips, I'd always look out the car window into the deep woods just knowing that I would see Bigfoot or some other beast. At any moment, I'd see their large shapes lumbering through the brush. Now, grown up, I'm usually the skeptical type. However, when you see something unexplained with your own eyes, it changes you. I was home for 1 week back in college. I was going to school 2 hours away in New Orleans. While visiting friends that Sunday night, I had lost track of time. It was already 1 a.m. before I decided to drive back to the city. I called my dad before I left, and he gave me the usual warnings. Watch out for deer. That stretch of I-10, which leads to New Orleans, contains miles of thick forest and swampland. On a moonless night, like that night, you can't see 20 feet past the inky, black tree line. Seeing deer have a midnight snack just off the shoulder of the road was a constant sight on those nights. The first hour of the trip was completely normal. This drive is routine at this point. I can remember every sign and exit. Each one draws me closer to my dorm room bed. Once I hit the swamps about 40 miles outside the city, a dense, low-lying fog creeps onto the highway. It was late at this point, and I hadn't seen another car for quite a while, but I still slowed down to be safe. It was strange that I hadn't seen any deer at this point. Even in the fog, you can still see the shine of their eyes in your headlights. The fog must be keeping them in the woods, I suppose. Not a split second after finishing this thought, I'd see a pair of shining eyes in the distance. The image of what I saw next will always be burned into my mind. I saw a pair of piercing bright orange eyes. They sat at a weird height for a deer. The eyes far too big to be that of a doe. The gaze of this creature was fixed on me, unflinching. When my car finally approached, the beast moved at me. I couldn't make out its shape too well, other than it had oddly long arms and legs. The beast leaped over my car in a single pounce. It was then, for a split second, I saw the monster's horrible jagged teeth, yellow and fang-like with a glimmer of bright red, fresh blood. In the next instant, I heard a loud popping noise come from my tire. The car came to an instant stop. Looking outside the passenger window, I saw a large deer dead on its side, its antlers lodged between the wheel and the car. The car wouldn't move. Getting out of the car and pulling the deer out was the only option. The fear I felt at this point still makes me sick to my stomach. The next thing I know, I'm already out of the car, yanking on the deer's antlers, which have completely shredded my tire. Looking down at the carcass, it appears to be completely hollowed out. Not only was the deer missing its organs, I noticed there was very little blood left. I can hear my heart pounding in my head as I struggle to dislodge the antlers. That's when I look up and see the orange eyes racing at me. They moved at a furious pace, giving the deer one last successful tug. I fly into the car through the passenger door. Crawling over to the driver's seat, I slam the car into drive and hit the gas hard. The tires screeched to life. The eyes disappeared in the taillights through my rearview mirror. My tire rim was completely deformed by the time I made it to the next exit. It had to be towed back to the city. I sat in complete silence the entire ride home on the wrecker, still in shock. The next day, on the phone with my dad, he must have sensed something was wrong in my voice. He was very understanding, even though to him, I ignored his warning to watch out for deer. Looks like the antlers completely ruined the tire, he said calmly. We'll have to replace the whole thing. I understand, I responded. It's the other damage I just don't understand. Dad, what other damage? I asked. I wasn't ready for what he said next. The scratches. You have 5 very deep scratches on your truck. The only answer I could produce was okay. Since that day, I will never make that drive at night, terrified of what I may see deep in the swamp.
So on Friday, June 6th of 2008, I took the day off of work to go on a solo backpacking trip up near Mount Adams in Oregon for 2 nights. This is something that I used to do every few months, because there is nothing that can clear your mind like a few nights alone out in nature. It started off like all the other trips. I hiked in from one of the trails that run through the area, headed out to an area that I selected that was far enough from a trail to not see other people, but close enough to make it back easily in the off chance that something happened. Yes, I know that a lot of people caution hikers and campers about going alone, but I love the solitude so much. I reached my destination midday on Friday and set up my little camp and foraged around for some prime sticks to wheedle on. It was a solitary paradise until the sun set and it became dark. That's when I knew something was weird. You know that feeling you get when you are being watched? Well, mine was on high alert. All I knew is that something felt wrong, and my heart would not stop pounding. I do not know how to describe it in any other way than I felt like prey, like I was being hunted. I had never felt this before on any of my trips out here, so I was a little bit freaked out, but tried to just brush it off as just stress carrying over from work. Now, by this time I had my little fire going, but it was small because I was technically not allowed to be camping there, let alone have a campfire. I decided that I wanted to start piling wood on because I needed to make sure I could see and ward off anything that was getting an idea of visiting me. The only problem was I didn't have enough wood for a big fire because I was only planning on a small one with twigs and small branches. This is when I made my mistake. I pulled out my battery-powered lantern and sat it near the fire for some more light as I went a few feet around my little camping zone looking for more sticks. I should have taken it with me. There was almost no moon at all that night, so anything that was not touched by my campfire or lantern was pitch black. As I was grabbing some of the small branches on the outer edge of my light, I felt something slam into the back of my thigh so hard that it spun me about and threw me to the ground. The pain. Oh God, the pain was horrible. Once my adrenaline caught up to the situation, it helped settle it a bit, but it felt like my leg was on fire. I landed on a rock that was not there a moment before, and I began looking for who threw it at me. But because of the way I had fallen, I was in the shade of my tent. Before I could hobble around my tent to grab my lantern, I heard this weird scraping sound on the ground and a little cloud of dust started coming my way. Whoever had thrown the rock at me had evidently kicked dirt onto my little fire. I only had the light from the lantern, which wasn't super bright to begin with. I started shouting something at this point, but I don't remember what I said, just that it was colorful with a number of threats attached. I got to my feet, hobbled to my little lantern, and pulled the machete out of its little sheath on my belt. I stood there shining the light in all directions around me, looking and yelling for the perps to come out, but nobody did. I must have stood there for a good half hour. I didn't know what else to do, and my leg was really starting to hurt again, so I decided I would just go into my tent and sit there listening. It was eerily quiet, no woods noises, no animals, nothing. So I just sat there holding my lantern and waited for what must have been hours. I finally felt like I could let my guard down, so I turned off my light and let my eyes adjust. There was nothing but that too quiet sound while my eyes were starting to adjust to the darkness. That's when something grabbed my foot through the door of the tent and started dragging me out. It felt like a vice just grabbed my ankle and started hauling me through the woods. I thrashed and screamed and tried to grab anything that was there, but I was too disoriented. I thought I was dead for sure. Bear attack, dinner time, and I was the meal. But then suddenly I was free. I turned and started scrambling for my tent as fast as I could. I looked behind me, but I couldn't see a thing. But whatever dragged me had taken me a good 10 to 12 feet from my tent in just a few seconds. I grabbed my light and machete and went back to my standing defense, but nothing happened. Not for the rest of the night. I crouched down and eventually sat there for the last few hours of darkness, but I never let my guard down. Eventually, all sounds returned to the woods and the sky started getting a little brighter, so I packed up my stuff and hauled ass out of those woods as fast as I could. I have no idea what or who it was that dragged me around like a toy, but I will never be going back to find out, that's for sure. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. Also, make sure you check out HollyWizzle and the Slumlocker's channels. Those guys are awesome, and thank you both so much for joining me in my collaboration video, or my Collaboration Tuesdays, as I like to call it. And well, guys, before I get into other news, I just would like to say thank you so much for everybody for subscribing, because we are well over 5,000 subscribers. Thank you so much, everybody. It's really amazing to see the Nightmare Army grow and grow with every single day. It's just great. So thank you all so much for subscribing. It's just been awesome, really. I mean, waking up this morning, seeing like over 5,000 subs, and then, you know, the night before that, seeing to get 5,000 is just awesome. So again, thank you so much, everybody. You guys are great. And now, I know Killer Orange Cat tagged me in a personal scary story to tell. I just want everybody to know that I am going to do it. Although it's not going to be a Friday's video, just because I need time to write it, and, you know, if I spend, like, you know, a couple of days writing it, then I'm not going to be able to get it out on Friday. So, Friday's video is going to be something completely different, but just know, the personal scary story video, that's going to come next week, just know that. I know I'm kind of breaking the rules here, sorry, Killer Orange Cat, but, I'm a little pressed for time here, but anyways, guys, I hope everybody's okay with the personal scary story being next week. I might even throw it in a loop with Collaboration Tuesday video. So, anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, and as always, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.